Wow, so great to see everybody. This is so much fun. Okay, let's go and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Gill, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Green Apron Alliance. Thank you all for joining us. Every May, the Green Apron Alliance brings compelling and insightful thought leaders, ideas, and resources to our Starbucks alumni community. This is the 4th annual presentation of our Inspired Stories events, and we could not be more excited to share this special day with each of you. But we are taking a slightly different approach this year. The world is clearly not thriving. Yes, it looks like we may have pushed beyond a global pandemic, but we're still suffering under tremendous uncertainty, sorrow, and pain. No one knows what tomorrow will bring, and yet we persevere for our families, friends, and communities. We could all use a little help right now. We could all benefit from knowing how to move forward. The Green Apron Alliance is a nonprofit Starbucks alumni-driven organization, Alumni for Alumni, that harnesses the power of our talented volunteers to bring tools, insights, and resources to our community. Our Flourishing team, a steering committee inclusive of Wendy Colley, Colleen Angeles, KATHERINE Cheng, and Craig Bush, and our board of directors, is proud to bring the science and research from Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University and its director, Dr. Tyler VanderWeele, to you. Our moderator today is my dear friend, KATHERINE Cheng. Among her many talents is a sustainability and social impact professional who works with the White House, is a generous contributor and supporter of our diverse communities, and most importantly, is a mom to 2 13-year-old boys. While we encourage you to enjoy this conversation with Tyler on his thoughts about well-being, whole human well-being, we want you to share your comments and questions in the chat feature. And there's an echo. We may not have time to address each question. Hey, Courtney, can you mute everybody? From time to time, we'll pose questions to you through the chat feature and through a poll.
One second. Can everybody, if I press mute all, you're going to be muted too? If everybody could just mute themselves, that would be great.
Thank you. All right, so from time to time, we will pose questions to you in the chat feature. We encourage you to participate, but please keep muted. You'll want to stick around for a full hour as we'll be sharing some exclusive offers and opportunities with you at the end. So with no further delay, please enjoy Dr. Tyler VanderWeele and KATHERINE Cheng. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie, and welcome, Dr. Tyler. We are so excited to have you. And my first question is going to be just, what was your vision for doing this work so we can kind of understand what this conversation is actually going to entail?
Yeah, so I mean, my academic discipline is public health, and so I've studied both physical and mental health over the years, and felt, we study these things very well. There have been tremendous improvements in health. I mean, we study health well, we study income well. These are important, but people care about more than that. They care about health and income, but they also want to be happy. They want to have a sense of meaning and purpose in life. They want to be a good person. They want to have good relationships. So I started thinking, why aren't we studying these other aspects of well-being with the same level of empirical rigor that we do with health and with income? Why do we know so much more about the determinants of cardiovascular disease than what gives rise to a sense of meaning and purpose in life, despite that being desired by almost everyone? So the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, I started really with the goal of trying to understand the distribution and determinants of all different aspects of well-being: health, happiness, meaning, character, relationships, financial resources, and trying to do this across the globe. So we've been using various data sets to try to, in some ways, establish a deeper understanding of well-being. And in that regard, we are in fact launching with Gallup this year, a global flourishing study will be collecting data on 240,000 individuals in 22 different countries, representing about half the world's population. Sort of understand who's flourishing, who's not, why, what can we do to help those who are struggling. But it was really with that vision to understand and promote well-being, to promote flourishing, that this work began.
Great. Well, I'm going to list out the 7 domains just really quickly. So we have close social relationships, mental health, physical health, happiness and life satisfaction, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and financial security. And I list those because those are obvious for what people might equate to happiness. But the question is, how do you measure it? And how can you distinguish flourishing from happiness or explain how they are related?
So, I mean, with measurement, there are different ways to go about that. Some people collect data on tweets, for example, or analyze texts. But I think the simplest way is just to ask people how they're doing. How satisfied are you with life as a whole these days? To what extent do you find the activities in your life worthwhile? Are your relationships as satisfying as you would like them to be? And then generally just kind of self-report, 0 to 10 completely unsatisfied to 10 completely satisfied. People report on their lives. That very exercise we find leads to self-reflection and examination, can sometimes even prompt people to make changes in their life. But that data is also very useful for research purposes. Gallup, for example, has been collecting data on life satisfaction for about 15 years now in countries throughout the world. And I think we've learned a lot from it. But that really does focus just on happiness, which I think is important. People want to be happy. We should study happiness. But that's not all of flourishing. That's not all of well-being. And it's not identical, for example, to meaning and purpose or to having good relationships. And you can see this in a few different ways. One of which is people will sometimes trade off some measure of happiness for the pursuit of an important purpose, or trade off some measure of happiness to invest in a relationship. So these are distinct elements of well-being. Likewise, we find different patterns around the world. Levels of happiness tend to be higher in richer developed countries, but measures of meaning and purpose tend to be higher in poorer developing countries. So how do we make sense of this? And can we carry out economic development in a way that preserves meaning and purpose? These are some of the, I think, very interesting and important questions that arise when we realize that happiness isn't all of well-being.
And would you say that part of taking the assessment is how people actually realize where they might be, and just shining a light on just thinking about it helps them to actually develop what that means in their life?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've had numerous experiences where someone going through this survey will say, wow, I mean, having gone through this, I realized social relationships is in fact the domain that I would rate lowest for myself, and I want to invest in those more. I'm going to live my life a little bit differently now. It can also be helpful to see how things are changing over time. I try to take the survey once a quarter myself, and again, I find it interesting and helpful, and a tool for reflection. So in addition to its research use, I think simply as a self-assessment, a tool for reflection, these sorts of questions are valuable.
Yeah, and I guess that makes sense because as we go through life, things will take place over others, as you have said. There might be a replacement, or there's emphasis on something versus another. So how do extenuating circumstances skew the measurement of flourishing? For instance, life impacting events. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. There's illness and death, war and politics, which we're in the midst of as well right now, and mental health, which is sort of a constant, and more light is being shown on this right now. But how does this disproportionately impact those who are underserved already?
Yeah, no, all good questions. So one's extent of flourishing certainly depends in part on oneself and one's actions, the way you look at life. But unquestionably, it's also shaped by external circumstances, some of which we just don't have control over. Like the emergence of the pandemic, and that is going to affect what people's well-being. And we in fact have nationally representative U.S. data on this. Across these various domains prior to the pandemic, the average was about 7, except in the financial and material stability, where the average in the U.S. was about 6. And unsurprisingly, we found well-being declined during the pandemic. That's probably not a big shock to anyone, but it was interesting. The domains were affected in different ways. Happiness went down quite considerably, no surprise there. Health went down quite considerably, no surprise there. We found the largest declines in financial and material stability. This data was during the pandemic, was collected in June 2020, the height of unemployment in the United States. But interestingly, some of the other domains weren't affected as much. Meaning and purpose declined a little bit, but not all that much. Our character assessments were essentially level. And somewhat surprisingly, social connectedness went down a little bit, but not as much as I would have anticipated. And it seems one of the things the pandemic has done is it's gotten people to focus more on their relationships at home, whether that's with family or friends or whatnot, or to connect via Zoom. Now, experiences have not been uniform. There's evidence that children felt closer to their fathers during the pandemic. But I think for people, especially living alone, this has been a very difficult time. And so I think this brings me to the second part of your question, which was, what about the variability, and what about those in particularly difficult or adverse circumstances? And I think it is the case that the pandemic and adverse circumstances affect some groups more than others. And I think these flourishing assessments help us to see who is struggling and how can we reach out and help them. But looking at these different domains, I think also sometimes challenges our preconceptions. So we've been doing work on trying to address racial disparities, for example, and we find, as many others have, that there's a gap, a black-white gap, with regard to health and with regard to financial and material stability. But interestingly, we find levels of meaning and purpose and social relationships often higher in the Black communities than in white communities. And so, I think this points to not only disparities which need to be thought about and addressed, but also the strengths of these communities as well, and things that we can learn that are going well. So I would say that the flourishing lens just broadens the set of considerations, and it doesn't mean health is unimportant or income is unimportant, but it helps us to get a fuller picture of all that's going on.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to hone in on the financial security piece. And, the phrase "money doesn't buy you happiness" has been around forever. And while people say it, they may not necessarily believe it. I mean, after all, if you have money, and I'm not talking about just being wealthy, you can, just having enough money to ensure a roof over your head, food on your table, your basic needs are met, such as health and recreation. How can one see themselves flourishing if they don't have some measure of financial and material stability?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And, I think the notion that money can't buy happiness is only partially true. I mean, the data suggests increasing levels of happiness with increasing income, up until about I would say, $100,000 threshold in the United States. And the threshold is going to vary by region and by country and so on. And then it really levels off. Further money doesn't buy you much happiness, maybe a little bit incrementally, but it's not what's driving it after that level. But having substantial financial insecurity unquestionably threatens the other flourishing domains. Extreme anxiety, of course, can generate mental health difficulties, can create tensions within relationships, may mean that you don't have sufficient time to pursue the things you think are most important. So the financial and material resource piece is a critical one, and it's one of the reasons we insist on collecting data on this as well. Many well-being researchers in psychology, for example, just ignore that, but it's a critical piece for sustaining well-being across these different domains. Now, having said that, again, all of the statements I've made are based on averages. I do think it is possible. It's more difficult, but it is possible for someone to flourish in various ways, even in more adverse circumstances, and again, possibly in some surprising ways. And I commented earlier that levels of meaning and purpose are higher in poorer developing countries than richer developed countries. So the people have found ways to find meaning, often in spite of what are difficult and challenging situations. So again, I don't think the financial and material stability piece should be neglected, but it's not all there is to flourishing, and one can sometimes find some level of happiness, of meaning, of good relationships, even in challenging financial circumstances.
Right. And I think that the question really also is about, personal flourishing. Like what do personally people think of, right? So if we look on the outside and we say, oh, they might not have these material things, but they have stability in certain areas. So one of those things would be educational attainment, because educational attainment has been one of the main areas that can impact flourishing based on your research. And we know that, there are certain barriers and the systemic barriers if you really want to go down deep into into data sets. But so based on that, though, the flourishing concept, they resonate with those who are more affluent. So since educational attainment has shown to be a key factor, how can we make it more equitable? How, I think that there's a lot in this work that you're doing, and equity, and making sure that people have equal access to the same types of things, education being a core tenet of that.
Yeah, so again, I do think we've got strong evidence that education helps contribute to all of the different domains of flourishing, to happiness, to health, to meaning, to relationships, and so on. And so, I think trying to ensure access to good education for everyone is important. I think if we did that, we'd see increases in levels of population flourishing. Having said that, there are some who have struggled with their education, or who have dropped out and are midlife, don't have degree, and that doesn't mean they can't flourish, though. Education is one pathway, but there are many others. Often, if we think about what's shaping population health, from my own discipline of public health, we use a lens taking into account two factors. We think the major determinants of physical health, what are they? We ask what's common in the population, and what has strong effects on the health outcomes that we care about. And so when we do this for physical health, we're led to things like physical activity, and good diet, and adequate sleep, and not smoking. But if we take the same lens and think about flourishing, we ask what's common and what with regard to what's.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Tyler. Would you mind starting that answer over? You froze. You're actually frozen right now.
I'm glad it's not on me.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, everyone.
So sorry. Now you're back. You're back.
Yeah,
okay.
You're back. Okay.
But the whole time was frozen, so I'm so sorry.
Okay. So again, if we use the same approach and ask what shapes not just physical health, but also happiness and meaning and character and relationships, we end up with a somewhat different list. Education is an important piece of that, but also family, religious community, and work. I mean, strong evidence from numerous studies that these four pathways are common in the population and really have strong effects across the flourishing domains. So someone without education may have a really strong family, or maybe they're in a work environment that they've been in for decades, a family business that's extremely supportive, or maybe they have a really important religious or spiritual community that contributes. So each of these pathways, they're not necessary, they just help. And so even someone without a strong education, I think, can flourish. There are other pathways, but from a policy standpoint, I think we should be doing what we can to strengthen these pathways, to improve education, to ensure good education for all, along with strengthening families, strengthening the workplace, strengthening religious communities, helping these different communities and institutions to really provide those opportunities to flourish.
Are you able to provide some real life examples of how embracing the philosophy of flourishing has helped people?
Sure. I think going back to the notion of simply going through the questions being a sort of a self-assessment, allowing for reflection. When we've done this in workplace settings, we've had responses like, oh, those questions on purpose really made me think. I really want to give back more. We had one respondent saying that on and off they had thought about volunteering in their community, and then having gone through the questions and realizing that they were missing a deeper purpose, they committed then and there to engage in these volunteering activities. And so again, I think kind of just going through thinking about life, thinking about the different ways one can flourish, often prompts people to change their behaviors. And likewise, we've been doing some work on forgiveness, and I think the experience of being wronged is a very common one, and the research suggests that holding on to those grudges actually affects mental health, leads to often higher anxiety and depression, and possibly physical health, cardiovascular health as well. And so we've been working with psychologists to develop kind of easy to use forgiveness workbook interventions to help people who want to forgive but are struggling to do so. And we've tested these in randomized trials, the same sorts of trials that are used to evaluate the effectiveness of vaccines, for example, but randomized trial in 5 different countries, and we found that these practices of forgiveness do increase. Going through these workbooks do help people forgive, but they also alleviate depression, alleviate anxiety, and we found using our flourishing measure that they improved these flourishing domains. Not so much financial and material stability, but the other 5. And so when we've engaged people with these ideas, maybe it would be worthwhile to let go of the anger. Think about what role this is playing in that anger, in that grudge in your life, and what might enable you to flourish better. Is it holding on, or is it letting go? Is it replacing that ill will with goodwill? I mean, that likewise, putting that within the context of flourishing, I think, has helped people to move towards forgiveness. So anyway, those are just a couple of the practical examples that come to mind, how this idea has in practice helped people live differently and flourish. Great.
And we've also seen a lot of disturbing stories lately of suicide, and an alarming number are coming from educational institutions, students. But how do you see your work sort of helping to reach young people, but not just young people, people who are struggling with mental health, and how can the research and the data help to help doctors and figure out how to get people out of the slump?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, and I mean, maybe I'll begin with some of the more depressing statistics, and then move on to reasons for hope, perhaps. But the mental health rates with regard to younger people and at universities, mental health disorder issues have increased dramatically over the last 15 years, and And it's a problem. It's a problem that needs to be addressed, and it's one that's reflected in our flourishing data as well. Earlier studies on well-being suggested more of a U-shaped well-being curve with age, where those who were younger and those who were older were doing better, and those kind of midlife, struggling both with children and with aging parents and mortgages and so on, we're not doing as well. That's been the traditional pattern. But what we've found increasingly and quite definitively in our most recent wave of data in the United States in January of 2022 is that left part of the U has been flattening. And now it looks like, shockingly, across these flourishing dimensions, everyone is increasing with age up until, into the 70s. Young people just are not doing as well as they were before. And, likewise, we've seen mostly a recovery during from the effects of COVID on the flourishing domains. They're pretty close now on average to the January 2020 levels prior to the pandemic, but not for young people. Young people haven't recovered, and so I think this is a real crisis at the moment, and I think this needs to be addressed on multiple fronts. So some of it is traditional therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, say, for depression and anxiety, to try to get someone out of this state when necessary. Pharmaceutical interventions are also, I think, very promising, kind of just like our forgiveness workbook intervention. There's workbooks for depression and anxiety, David Byrne's Feeling Good, for example, which I think are useful, helpful resources, which likewise have been evaluated in randomized trials. So I think addressing the problems head on is important, but I think we also need to focus on the positive, to kind of build a resilience. I think to promote flourishing, to try to prevent these issues from arising, and I think that requires a couple of things. First, I think we should make use of the research we have on practices that help, like I mentioned forgiveness, but also gratitude. 3 times a week, write down 3 things you're thankful for and why. Again, dozens of randomized trials have indicated that this increases happiness, reduces depressive symptoms, improves quality of sleep, decreases self-reported physical health symptoms. So we should start practicing gratitude. Build this into educational curricula as well as family contexts. Likewise, acts of kindness, 5 once a week. Choose a day and try to carry out 5 acts of kindness that you wouldn't otherwise do. Takes quite a bit of planning to do 5 on a single day, but doing so, again, has profound effects on happiness, on sense of social connectedness, on engagement. So I think these sorts of practices we could embed as a fun way to connect with others within educational contexts, within workplace contexts, family life. I think we should make use of these things. But I do also think that the communities that people are a part of and that participate in are really critical. The pathways to flourishing I had mentioned before, in education, family, work, religious community, each of these in some ways is a community. It's an institution. It's something that has a life that extends beyond any given individual. And I really think it's those longer, deeper commitments and relationships that help, not just with happiness and health, but also forming meaning, forming character, developing really good relationships. So I think there's evidence that young people have withdrawn from many of these communities, and with regard to the pandemic, haven't been able to engage. Others who are older have these and can draw upon them during the pandemic via Zoom, but if you don't have them to begin with, it's very difficult. So I think that the pandemic has disproportionately affected young people. I think there's a real mental health and well-being crisis, and I think we need to use tools both to address mental health head-on, to promote well-being, and then to encourage community participation.
Right. Well, you set a high bar for 5 random acts of kindness a week. I actually require my kids to do 1 a week, so I'm going to have to up my game. But on that note, though, in terms of not just young people, actually, but it is more focused on young people. Technology, how do you think that has exacerbated this sort of, the depression? And, there's so much comparing themselves to each other. There's FOMO. There's so much. But again, it's not just young people. I find adults doing the same thing. And during the pandemic, relying more and more on their phones and technology to kind of, I see, adults doing, going on TikTok, and it's always referencing TikTok. And I'm like, read a book or do something different. But how does technology play into all this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think in terms of the causes of the mental health challenges with young people, I do think technology is not the whole story, but certainly a part of it. And I think the best studies have indeed indicated that time spent, especially large amounts of time spent, kind of once you pass that hour threshold on social media type venues, leads to poorer mental health, poorer well-being. These are averages, so I mean, it's not as though all uses are bad. I think people use Facebook principally sometimes to connect with friends and share things with people across the world. But as you also hinted at, it's also used for social comparison and to try to glorify your life. And I think we need to do a lot of serious reflection on in what ways does technology promote flourishing, and in what ways is it hindering. Some of that is, developing or trying to convince social media companies to promote the flourishing inducing uses and to try to discourage those that are not. But I do think some of it needs to come from the person themselves to kind of develop the habits that are helpful. And I do think limiting social media use, choosing to do so is really important in that regard. I mean, there's kind of the negative effect of being on it yourself and kind of the nasty comments that can be exchanged, the divisions it can sow, the jealousies and envy and so on. But I think another piece of it is then not having time for other activities, which might in fact be more satisfying, which might be more engaging, or spending time with people face to face. So while some of it is, I think, the negative effects of being on it itself, some of it's more of a substitution effect, where if you're doing this, you're not spending time with other things, which really are more conducive to flourishing. So I think as a society, we actually need to do some reflection on how do we make use of technology to enhance rather than inhibit flourishing.
And from a business or corporate standpoint, how do you think corporations and businesses can use flourishing to get the best out of their employees?
Yeah, so the studies we've run in workplace settings have indicated that flourishing itself across these various domains is associated with greater work engagement, greater job satisfaction, less turnover, less distraction at work. So, I think the promotion of flourishing has the lower healthcare costs too, has the potential to generate important business outcomes. And there are, I think, often people view there being trade-offs. So if we have a more generous family policy, then maybe productivity will go down. I think the data suggests that, at least in some cases, the goals can be consonant. Actually, promoting well-being will help increase productivity. People care a lot about health and wellness programs and sick days and so on, but some of our own research has suggested that in terms of cost to the company, the cost of distraction is far higher, maybe 5-10 times higher than is the cost of absenteeism. And so how do we create a culture? How do we create flourishing employees who are more engaged? And I think there are multiple strategies. There are top-down strategies, there are bottom-up strategies, and they're not mutually exclusive. We can employ them all from greater workspace flexibility to family-friendly policies on sort of the management end, to simple things again like encouraging gratitude practices or acts of kindness or opportunities to volunteer in the community. I think likewise individuals have an important role in creating a more flourishing and engaged workplace. There's practices we've studied sometimes called job crafting, which pretty much anyone can do at any level of the employee hierarchy. But the idea is just you think about your work and you ask 3 questions, kind of how could I do my tasks more efficiently? What are my relationships at work and how could I improve those? And how can I connect my task to the ultimate product or service or mission of the company itself to try to generate meaning? And it doesn't take a lot of time to do this, but if one engages in this regularly, what these studies have found is it increases work engagement, it increases well-being. I mean, it helps both the individual and the company. So encouraging these sorts of practices, I think, likewise, be very, very valuable. So I think I think the workplace in some ways is a highly underutilized form to promote well-being.
So we are all going to have the opportunity to take this flourishing assessment, thanks to you and to your organization. So, I wonder, how can one understanding one's flourishing score help us to help others?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know some of these activities and policies from research can contribute, but there's only so much that we can study with these research methods, and a lot of life comes down to the individual and to experience and to try to learn how to navigate challenges in life. And so I think going through something like the Flourishing Assessment for those domains one's doing well in, think about why. What has brought me to this point? What can I learn from my experience? And then likewise, think about the domains one's not doing as well in, and what changes can I make, and what do I learn from my life and from the changes I want to make in terms of how to promote my own well-being, and then sharing that with others, because I do think a lot of that practical wisdom on how to live well is passed from person to person, often from one generation to next, but within the context of friendships, in the context of family. It could be within the context of coworkers. So again, the research itself can only take us so far. I think it's important. I think we learn things that at a group or population level can enhance well-being, but there's a lot that's individualized, and so again, I think just sharing, reflecting on one's life, trying to learn lessons, sharing those with others is one way in which kind of thinking about flourishing for oneself can help others flourish as well.
Right. And you've been working on this for a while, but for so many of us, it is new. So can you talk about what some of the misconceptions of what people think flourishing is or isn't?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, the 2 most problematic elements, misconceptions, are first thinking it's binary, either you're flourishing or you're not, that there's some sort of magical cutoff. And that's not the case. No one's perfectly flourishing. And it's kind of a matter of really of degree. And so the idea is for each person, for those areas where they're struggling most, try to improve. But it's not a binary thing. Either you're flourishing or you're not. Everyone has room for improvement, and there's no magical threshold below which if you're there, you're just not flourishing. And then I think the other common misconception is to think flourishing is unidimensional. It's sort of just along a single spectrum. No, there are different aspects to life. You may find that sure, because of this really demanding job, I've got a strong sense of purpose, but the work hours are so long that it's adversely affecting happiness and social relationships. But maybe for this stretch of time, for this stretch of life, I'm going to focus on this, and my purpose right now is off off the charts. So yeah, understanding the multidimensional nature of it, I think, is important. Now, likewise, for particular groups who may be struggling with a specific aspect of flourishing, you might think of the elderly, those who are bedridden. Are they fully flourishing? No, I mean, their physical health's on decline, but that doesn't mean they can't flourish in other ways. They might still have a rich set of relationships and find meaning in those, and having to work through those physical health difficulties maybe leads them to think that they've become a stronger person as well. So even someone in adverse circumstances, like at the end of life, can still flourish in various ways. So just remembering that flourishing itself is multidimensional.
Yeah, so flourishing is on a spectrum, right? Like, I mean, it's the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. So thinking of like, for instance, Ukraine, and how going through war, how does your research show, sort of that swing? If an event happens that literally impacts every part of those 5 areas, or the 6 areas, no, 7 areas, I'm sorry, 7 areas. How does that actually, what is that pendulum swing? Like, how long would it take to recover? I mean, I know it's different for everybody, but we're talking about a country, or, a larger group of people, because we've been talking about individuals. So do you have any data on that type of, what flourishing tells us in those instances?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've been collecting data on well-being long enough to be able to know about, say, the effects of war. What we've seen with the pandemic is that over 2 years, there was essentially for the most part, a recovery in well-being across these domains. I think war is probably going to take longer. I mean, the destruction one sees in Ukraine is substantial, but maybe not longer across all the domains. I mean, one could imagine, if the war were to cease, that relationships could in fact even strengthen potentially, or the notion that we need to rebuild our country could lead to a great sense of meaning and purpose. But experiencing the after effects, the destruction of one's home, I mean, that's going to affect happiness for some time to come. Health as well, for those who have been injured, possibly permanently. There are going to be real gaps for some time. There used to be a notion in the well-being literature of a set point, that everyone has a set point, and that any circumstance like winning the lottery or losing your job, it affects well-being for a little while, but then you return to your set point. And I would say that's been fairly thoroughly discredited. There's no doubt that people come to these questions of well-being and happiness with a particular disposition, the genetics and constitution, it does matter. But the notion that you always return to where you were before, I think is wrong. Life circumstances really do matter. But it's a question of, I think, first doing what we can to improve well-being, whatever the circumstances may be. And again, things like gratitude or acts of kindness or forgiveness, these things do help. We know that. But then also maybe focusing on those areas where there really is potential. If health is, because of injury from war, is simply never going to be fully addressed, think about your relationships, think about purpose, find ways to improve flourishing in some of these other domains. But yeah, while I would anticipate recovery possibly with meaning and relationships relatively quickly, I think something like happiness, financial stability, health will be seeing effects for some time to come.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into politics, but I want to talk about how there's a deep political divide right now in the US and also many parts of the world, and how one person's idea of flourishing literally contradicts another person's idea of flourishing. If you think about the type of topics and issues that are at odds, how do you think your research and how can that actually help maybe ease tensions across political divides, but also in terms of policy that have real life implications for many people that would impact their ability to find or to achieve the highest level of flourishing.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe I'll make two comments in that regard, because I do think it is really a crisis that we are facing as a nation. The data from Gallup indicate that while 85% of Americans are somewhat satisfied or very satisfied with their life, only 17% think the country's headed in the right direction. So I mean, a massive gap between kind of individual satisfaction and satisfaction with the community, with the country. And I think that's problematic, because I do think just the pathways to flourishing, principal pathways are communal. We need these communities long term to promote flourishing. We need that social fabric. And so I think the divisions we see in this country are problematic. There are real disagreements, and I just think that needs to be acknowledged, and I think the reasons given for them, trying to find ways to navigate are important. But I think also we need a greater focus on what's held in common. If you look across the flourishing domains, again, everyone wants to be happy. Everyone wants to be healthy. Everyone wants a sense of meaning. Everyone wants to be a good person. Everyone wants good relationships. Everyone wants some level of financial and material stability. If we could spend more time focusing on the goals we held in common, and not ignore the disagreements, which are important, but I would say those should be getting 20% of the attention, and the things held in common 80%. And instead, we find things flipped. And if you look at what's happened to media reporting, for example, massive increase in negative news reporting over the last three years. It's like moving from the third percentile of the distribution to the 97th. I mean, it's totally overwhelmed and swamped any sort of analysis of news reporting on the negative side. And the research makes clear that negative news reporting has an adverse effect on your well-being. It also makes it more likely that you're going to interact with someone else negatively. And then that negative interaction is more likely to go on to result in further negative interactions. Conversely, positive news renders you more likely to treat others well. And that then renders them more likely to treat others well. So I think this has massive ripple effects throughout society. So in one piece, I kind of proposed that media outlets commit to at least one positive story for every 3 negative ones. And I think the research suggests this would actually make a big difference with regard to national well-being. But I think it also affects how we see the other. How do we see someone with whom we disagree? Do we want their well-being, or are they just now the enemy that we're set out to defeat, and we don't want them to flourish? As long as we're in that mindset, I think our country's headed in the wrong direction. So one of the most recent projects at the Human Flourishing Program is how to promote interpersonal love. We're looking at different sorts of relationships, parent-child, spousal or romantic relationships, but we're also looking at love of neighbor and love of enemy. And I think one of the profound teachings from my own faith tradition, Christian tradition, is love of enemy. And it's profound, it's radical, but someone who you disagree with, someone who maybe wants ill for you, you seek their good. And so how do we promote that? How do we bring that about in society? It's not going to dissolve the disagreements. Those need to be worked out, and we need to find a way forward as a country. But I think it is much easier to do so, to find those compromises, if we're genuinely interested in the well-being of others. And I think some of our country's future does depend on getting ourselves out of this very, very divisive equilibrium. I do think news agencies have a role in that, but I think each of us does as well.
Great. And we are at the close of our discussion here. So I'd like to ask you to just close us out here and give us, maybe one piece of advice on how we can flourish, or what's a final thought that you'd like us to know about flourishing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we're at this sort of critical moment post-pandemic, which has taken a big toll and on individuals' well-being, but I think also on the life of communities. Some of these have gone out of existence, closed, shut down forever. But I think to rebuild fabric of society, we need to reinvest. We need to spend time with others, rebuilding communal life, whether that's a volunteering organization, political organization, religious group, a card game, whatever it is. I think being with others face to face in person, I think the research suggests, does powerfully shape well-being. And I think we're at a point where more of these communities will continue to die unless there is reinvestment, and in some cases maybe recreating these various communities. But commit to find something additional or a deeper commitment to community life. I think the engagement helps with oneself. I think it builds the social fabric that we need to sustain flourishing over time, and I think it orients us to the common good, to wanting good for others as well. So at this particular moment, I think a focus on community really is critical.
Great. Thank you so much for all your insights, Dr. Tyler. And I'm going to kick it back to Marie now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Oh, that was an incredible experience. And thank you, Tyler, for all that you've shared with us. I was jotting down notes as I was listening, and every time I hear you speak, I always write even more notes. So I'm going to be able to write a book following you around. One of the things that always strikes me when I hear you speak is the intersectional connection of all these little micro things, how they kind of compound and impact us. The macro events of the world around us can really influence how well we are or not able to flourish. But some of the things that I've loved hearing from you is that the information around the data that's coming out of your research and what it can help us drive for solutions and opportunities to help one another. So I'm very encouraged and inspired to hear these examples from you. So thank you for bringing those to us. One thing too, I want to say that I loved hearing about how to focus on the common goals. And as I was listening to your perspective, we're all in leadership roles, whatever we're doing in our communities, whatever we're doing for each other, we all have a chance to act as a leader, and being able to reflect the values of flourishing is something that's very powerful, not only for ourselves, but to be able to give back to our communities in a really big way. So with that, I want to encourage you all to participate in yet another very cool experience and opportunity that we are going to be bringing to all Starbucks alumni around the world. We have been able to work with Dr. VanderWeele and his team at Flourishing Metrics to craft a flourishing assessment for our community that will allow us to follow along with his research and take these questions, 25 of them, very simple. And as Tyler mentioned early on, a lot of people that we've heard from, the verbatims coming from people who've taken these assessments, is that they found it very compelling, they found it very insightful, and it offered them a chance to reflect on themselves in a deeper way. So we're going to ask, at very minimum, 1,000 Starbucks alumni around the globe to participate in helping us grab some information on this assessment. And in turn, we'll come back with a very compelling, super deep report for us to build programming and further support and opportunities for our community. It's an exclusive opportunity that we're getting a chance to participate in. So I want to make sure you all get that link, take the assessment, and if you're ready to flourish, grab the link and start taking it now. But our team will be sharing this recording as well as the link to the assessment, and in a format that will allow you to send it out to your friends that are also alumni that could not join us today. So again, help us realize a goal of a minimum of 1,000 responses so that we can in turn bring you even more compelling opportunities, programs, and support in the spirit of helping us all flourish and be able to step forward in a more positive way. So again, Dr. VanderWeele, I am so very grateful to you for stopping by and taking time with our little group here. And thank you, Catherine, for your insightful questions and your incredible prep work on helping us pull this off. And I want to give a big shout out to the Wellbeing Flourish steering team that has spent a lot of hours and a lot of time just doing all those little things that help make this little event be really special and really unique. So with that, I thank you all. We will send out a recording and send out a recap of this. But from this moment on, go flourish and let us help you and join you on the journey. So thank you all.